Hey guys, welcome to the Motor Madhouse. Back in its second incarnation. Last time we did an episode on here was about 7 years ago, but my friend Steven here, we talked about bringing it back and figured this is a good time as ever. And kids are getting a little older, so Steve, why don't you go ahead and take it away and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for bringing me into this. And I mean, we basically just get talking about cars naturally whenever we're hanging out. So we figured we might as well record it and show other people some of the conversations. But yeah, I guess I don't know if you want me to talk about a little my car history, but grew up on a
Yeah,
farm. My dad's into Chevys. He got me into Chevys and built my 355 for a Silverado and kind of always been working on stuff ever since then. Moved more into I had different Japanese cars and German cars. I've had every kind of car there is, but just kind of there isn't a car that I've driven that I don't like, I guess would probably be the best way to put it.
very cool. Yeah, we met because you actually married my wife's cousin, so we started seeing each other's at all different kind of family gatherings and whatnot. But real quick, I kind of learned we have a very similar taste on the Venn diagram, and then we kind of have our areas we each kind of know a little bit more.
Yeah.
My background's more in mostly GM 68 to 72 muscle cars, GTOs, 442s, Buick Grand Sport, Chevelles. I grew up in a family where my dad restored those as a hobby. So going to the national events every year and always having cars off the frame, up on rotisseries, and doing everything from learning body work to engine work and everything in between. And as I went on, I got more into saving up my own money and kind of playing piggy move up with cars, starting off with like a Buick Roadmaster with the LT1 for my first car. Then eventually got like an F body Z28 6 speed with an LS1, and then got kind of crazy after there with superchargers and all kinds of different higher horsepower cars. But now
I've
last
seen the
since I
wall
talked
of
to you,
cars. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think it's north of 60 cars at this point,
Ooh.
but I stopped counting a while ago. But last time we talked, you were talking about your Camaro. You were working on a trade in. What's exactly going on with that situation?
Well, so I'm into like track driving a little bit, right? So I've done autocross, done some track days, different things like that. So I bought what I always wanted, which was a Chevy Camaro SS 1LE, which the 1LE package goes back to the 80s, right? There was this kind of like secret code that if you went to Chevy, you ordered the 1LE package, and they got you a road race kind of prepped Camaro. And they continued it on, into I think fourth gen had it for a little bit. It was again kind of secretive. Fifth gen, a lot less of a secret, and sixth gen was not a secret at all. Like all the magazines were reviewing them. So, but finally bought one. So what it was is it's the Camaro SS with all the ZL1 goodies, but the motor, right? So you get the suspension, you get the brakes, you get the better seats. Like it's just kind of a really well prepped car, and it'll never get hot on you because the motor is barely even like pushing anything, right, for what you're doing. I had it for 2 years. Love that car. Like if we were on the track all day long, I would never get rid of it, right? But I do like to drive my stuff to work, and it kind of came to the realization when I went to go get Culver's, and I went to get the drink at the drive-through, and I couldn't get it through the window, right? So it's me holding the thing, putting it through the window sideways, and hoping it doesn't spill all over. So I've been a long time BMW person, and I'm sad to say I don't know. I'm not sad. I traded in for a BMW M2, which is a totally different car, but at the same time, like it's a track car. It's pretty quick. It's probably faster actually in a straight line, but it doesn't sound nearly as good. That's the big letdown. Like not having the V8 is kind of a bummer, but it's so comfy. It's a little bit too much of a computer for me. It's like kind of a computer on wheels, but it's manual and about 500 horse. So
And you
it's not
said
really
that
all
this is
that bad.
one of the last manuals that BMW's making.
Yeah. So BMW's CEO said that after this car, no new M cars will have manual transmissions, and they very likely none of them will be without hybrid or electric technology on them. So
Jeez.
kind of had to grab onto that too. I am not as good at flipping cars maybe as you are, but I try not to lose money on them. So that's my big thing is buy something that I don't think is going to appreciate too much. And I think this will hold on. Like you see what happened to the Caymans and like different Porsches that were manuals that still existed out there, like they just skyrocketed. I don't think they'll
Oh
happen
yeah.
in this car, but I think it'll stay like
Well,
where
just
it's
look
at.
at the Pontiac G8 GXP.
Oh, right.
I mean, one with under 50,000 miles is still 30 grand.
Yeah.
They're
It
just
was like 38 new, right? Like,
yeah, it's a 13-year-old car,
yeah.
14-year-old now. But well, it's a good segue into the topic we wanted to talk about today. Is this kind of transformation of all the manufacturers talking about going to electric vehicles? And I kind of want to get your take on: do you think it's feasible? Do you really think by 2035 or whatever they're calling, they're already cutting production on all the performance stuff and a lot of the the Challenger, the Camaro? Um, where do you see this going? Is this going to be is it really going to take away the ICE engine?
Yeah, I guess, feasible is kind of out of our control, right? Like we'd like to say that the buyers have some kind of input there, but I don't know. At this point, the government might just force all of us into it, which would be pretty unfortunate, but we don't need to get into the depths of that topic. But
Right.
I think there's a place for it. And I don't think I'm the person for it, but there's definitely some people that maybe make sense for, right? Like I was explaining to someone, like they're talking about like, oh, the pain of charging your vehicle all the time. Like, oh, you're gonna sit there for 45 minutes. Like, well, the difference is if the person drives like a defined 30 miles every day, that's just their drive to work, right? You plug it in at your garage every morning, you've got a full tank of fuel, right? Equivalent, right? Where you and I with our ICE vehicles, we always have some point where maybe we come home and like, I have to get gas tomorrow morning or whatever. So, like in that world, that person, sure, but there's so many things that are bad about them though, too, right? Like just if we really want to dive into production and recycling of them and all those pieces, but from this standpoint of like, will it replace everybody's car? I think they're going to have to change up battery technology so much before we get anywhere near that, in my opinion. But
Right. I mean, just a lot of the reason for it is always comes from good intentions, but as we know that good intentions pave the way to hell.
right,
But a lot of it, like people don't factor in, first of all, just reading up on it, cause I'd heard this before, but before we started that like 80% of the lithium for these batteries comes from the Congo, and 20% of the labor is child slavery.
right,
And that's kind of the white elephant in the room that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And they're talking about making the world a better place with all this and that. And the fact that the lithium it's a very hazardous material too. So once these batteries go bad and they don't last an incredibly long time for how much you're paying for the vehicle, in my opinion. I recently looked up a used Tesla just like on Craigslist or Marketplace about a year ago, and it was like a 2015, and it said like just replaced the battery, had like 15 or 16,000 in receipts for it. And this is 2022. So talking about a 7-year-old car, you had to drop 15,000 in repairs into. I mean, that's more than my wife and I have in our daily drivers combined. My Suburban and my Fiesta and her Suburban, I have less money than that than just the batteries in that car.
right,
So who's affording this? Like each house having 2 cars, and you talk about these at-home charging stations. Well, each charging station is the equivalent of 25 refrigerators in your house. So if you have 2 of them, that's 50 refrigerators in every house. So what happens to the grid during a heat wave in California in July?
right. Well, they've even had issues with that, right? Recently,
Right.
Yeah, and that's again, I think there's some situations where could you replace could the mail vehicles be delivery vehicles be electric? And is there some way to make that, sure, maybe like, is there more efficient mass transit? Sure. But to assume that everyone's going to switch to those is impossible. But the almost bigger issue is the culture change and what people think of vehicles when they think of those, right? Is now that vehicle, instead of being like this piece that never aged you, that you always loved because it was that exact perfect vehicle for you, and people collect their 1970, Chevelle, and they're going to love that thing forever. Now it's this, right? This is what it is. So you're going to get that electric vehicle and it's going to feel outdated after 2 years. And then it's going to be worth less and you're going to trade it in. Nobody's going to want it because they want the latest Tesla Model 3 version 14, right? Like, so, and that's the real killer, is we're going to have all these vehicles that are not really that old, that probably have perfect bodies on them.
Yeah.
but nobody wants the insides of them. The software is too
and
old.
and the cost to get them back on the road probably isn't worth it. Whereas that's another thing is like people who don't have a lot of money or a 16-year-old buying their first car. I mean, I paid $1,000 for my 95 Roadmaster with 230,000 miles on it. So what kind of Tesla are you gonna pick up for that kind of money equivalent? You
Yeah.
know, when you're a 16-year-old 20 years from now, it's if it needs batteries and all that kind of outdated parts and outdated software, it probably wouldn't be worth bringing back to life. So at that point, it's like, well, what options do people with tiny budgets have to buy cars?
Well,
Whereas,
and then just like with our phones too. Oh, USB-C is the new thing. Okay, well now your lightning cables work anymore.
right,
We'll point to all the chargers. The EVs changed. Oh, you can only charge at home now because all
right,
the Tesla chargers are on the new charger. So yeah, I think they're going to force them into obsolescence so quickly that we will lose so much money on them too if you're to invest in it. Like, I was actually just reading an article this morning. Like, I forgot who it was. Volvo, I think they're doing micro leases. They're calling them 5 to 6 month leases on EVs
Hmm.
because buying a car is so expensive right now. Nobody wants the interest rates and the inflated prices, so people do 6 month leases on these EVs. Like, just wild.
it's insane.
Yeah.
Sometimes it pays. You save a lot of money being a gearhead sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
And really thinking about environmental friendliness too. Like, how much better is it for the environment to restore that 93 Suburban and put it back on the road, right? Like,
yeah,
that's probably in the end way better for everyone than buying the new Model Y.
right, exactly. And that's, I don't want people to think like we're anti-technology or anti-electric vehicle. Like it's not my cup of tea, but if that's someone's, that excites them and they're into it and they're a tech guy and they're like, hey, I can make this thing crazy fast. And that's one thing that's unfortunate about these things is they are stupid fast. And I hate that about them. They are faster than Hellcats and whatnot, 0 to 60, some of these Teslas. But there's something about it where it just doesn't excite me. Even when I see it go down a quarter mile at 10 seconds, it's like, just watching a drag race on mute. It's just
Right.
you don't have the chaos and the violence and the smell of the race fuel and the rubber, and all you hear is just wheels humming on asphalt. It's just I think any gearhead who loves motors and gears, it's just like it's like the opposite of everything you love about speed and cars. So I completely respect the power they pull out of them. It's undeniable. An internal combustion engine will never accelerate as fast as a DC electric motor. It's instant torque.
Right.
But as far as our complaints with it, it's the mandate. It's why would you have to force everyone to do this when it's really not practical? If it was practical, the market would be demanding it, not government incentives. People buy efficiency. I've personally owned a Prius, as much as I'm ashamed to admit that. It was one of the best cars I ever had as far as reliability and maintenance costs. But I bought it because I had a job where I'm driving a lot of miles and it made sense. It's an efficient vehicle. It'd be silly to drive around in a 3/4 ton truck with the amount of miles I was doing. But so efficiency does sell. And then even with these modern motors, look at like a 1970 Chevy 350 gets like 12 miles per gallon, makes 310 horse. And then by 97, you got the LS1 and the Vet's getting 29 miles per gallon, making 350 horse. And then after that, they just went crazy, crazy, crazy over the next 10, 15 years. And how much untapped potential is still left in the internal combustion engine with all the computer technology and all the same tech that's going into these EVs? If all that R&D money was being allocated by these manufacturers into just what kind of mileage can we pull out of these cars, and power is a byproduct of efficiency too. So a lot of these cars will be still being performance cars and getting pretty damn good mileage.
Well, that's like where EVs looked so much better for a while there. And again, I'll also say that I'm actually really techie. I love technology. I have a couple of friends with EVs. I think there's a place for them. I think they're cool, but I think how they're being pushed on us is different, right? Like, or not what I like seeing. But the cool thing about an EV is it can go from all the power to literally none of it in 50 times a second. It can change that. And that's the problem with combustion motors is you're kind of always running all eight. And now that they're starting to get cylinder deactivation a little bit more figured out, and they're getting infinitely adjustable valve timing, like
Direct injection.
Yeah, they're getting all that going. Like we could have motors that make 60 miles per gallon and 400 horse very easily, right?
Yeah, probably by
And it could be worked
2035.
on by you and I, right? Like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, and it's still with all the other stuff going on with the cars and the tech and all the GPS and all that stuff. I still prefer older stuff. I mean, until
yeah.
recently, every car I had still had a cassette player in it. But I just something about just being disconnected. It's kind of the whole experience. Like when I like the car on my shirt for the logo, like I had a '59 Buick, and there's something about it when you hop in it. Still the original 364 nail head. I mean, completely original paint, original interior. I mean, you fire it up, you feel it's the closest thing we have to time travel. It's like this is what it felt like in '59. Like you crank up some Buddy Holly and you just drive. Like this song was probably played in this car when it was pretty new. Like it's
Right.
just kind of a really unique feeling that I love the kind of the throwback. And I can do the same thing, like, in a WS6 Trans Am and listen to music from that era and stuff when you're cruising in it. It's just I like kind of the simplicity, kind of getting away from all the tech and your phone and all the stuff that you're surrounded by all day when you're in an old car. And I know that's unique to car guys, but I think it's something inherent in a lot of people though. If you were to experience that.
Yeah. I mean, you could kind of talk about that in our whole lives too. Like people have gotten so much more complex. I can't remember exactly the same, but like essentially every piece of technology we've ever added to make our lives better, like anything from dishwashers, vacuums, all those things in our household, like really hasn't saved us any time because we just found other things to keep ourselves busy. We need a bigger house. We need a bigger whatever, So, and that's the same way it is with cars. Like it used to be simple to enjoy them, but now it's like, well, I want to be able to enjoy them while seeing a full screen replication on my phone, streaming this, right? I need surround sound audio in my car, and I want to stay in the lane for me in case I read my text while I'm driving. Right.
Right.
So,
Oh yeah. No, I drove a friend of mine had a brand new F-150 King Ranch a few months ago, and it had all that self-driving and lane changing. Like you turn on the cruise control, and all of a sudden it's just yelling at me. It's like stay in your lane, and like I check the GPS on my phone. It's like eyes on the road, and I'm like, okay, big brother.
right, right.
I have never wanted to go back into a '50s car as much as I do right this moment. It's just that stuff's not for me, but I get it. A lot of people do like that, and there's gonna be a lot of new generation growing up where that's the norm. They're growing up in these
Oh
cars.
yeah.
They're gonna be afraid to get into a car with these old style seatbelts and crumple zones and no airbags and whatnot. Whereas, I mean, even growing up in the '90s was, we were always especially in my family, we were always in classic cars and convertibles, and it's just kind of a whole different experience than these kids these days are having. I mean, not our kids, but
Yeah. I remember my
but
parents had a Grand Marquis, and I would ride around the back of that thing on the deck, like behind the rear seat in the rear
mhm.
window. That's just where I was laying down while we are driving down the road with 60, right?
Oh
Can
yeah,
you
we
imagine
always had
that now?
station wagons, and the backwards seat, and I actually just bought and sold one last year, and we didn't have it for long. But my kids are so angry I sold it. They bring it up all the time. They're like, "Let's get in our station wagon with the backwards seat that looks backwards. It's so cool." And we're like, "Yeah, we probably should." I don't know why I sold that one. It was a good deal, but
Yeah.
can't keep them all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the whole push though for the EV, it reminds me of I read a book a couple years ago by Matt Ridley called How Innovation Works. And in that book, he breaks down this anytime the government kind of pushes incentives towards one direction of technology, like they back that horse. He gave a couple examples of how it backfires. And one he gave was, I think, the early 2000s. They gave these crazy incentives where ComEd would knock on these businesses' doors and try to get rid of their, was it the incandescent bulbs, I think, and go to fluorescent
Oh yeah.
because they're efficient. They spent like billions of taxpayer dollars to fund this to convert all these big factories and warehouses over to them. And everyone took it because they're like, hey, government's paying for it. And then what they didn't see coming was a few years later, the LED came out. And all these companies were like, hey, this is way more efficient and cheaper to replace. And they last a lot longer. So they completely just squandered the money for no reason. They forced everyone to go fluorescent. Whereas if we would have just waited, some unforeseen technology came in that was superior to both of them.
Yeah.
So I have a hunch EVs could be just that. They could be the fluorescent bulbs.
Well, and the other piece, whenever you create mandates, any company wants to make money off of that too. They'll find a way around it. And the biggest thing, like these mileage standards that they have right now, that they've had for a while, right? All that's happened is we've seen all the cars get bigger because they had the standards based off of the size of the vehicle, right? Like, oh, if you're under 15 feet long, you should be making this much mileage. Oh, well, now the Civic is 15 and a half foot long, right? Like, so you do things like that. The companies will just find a way around it. Like, so all you're doing is probably creating some other kind of issue. They probably could have backed out of that a little bit or maybe been more thoughtful in that. We still have Civics. They get 52 miles per gallon.
Yeah.
Right. But
the Insight, I mean, that was like the early 2000s. They're getting 50 miles per gallon hybrids. But yeah, it's I don't know. It drives me crazy because it's this whole kind of push that's based on a bunch of fallacies about how green it all is, and the production of it. They act like they're saving the world, whereas in reality, you're creating a super expensive car that's almost unattainable for most middle class families to have one of them, let alone two, at the current prices. The repairs are astronomical compared to internal combustion, and who knows the longevity of these things. Whereas, I mean, you're talking about having cars in the 50s and 60s, there's hot rodders building cars from the 20s and 30s today that are just recycling them. And yeah, I mean, you can always just go throw a Tesla on a Roadster top shop chassis and put an LS in it, if the bodies are still clean, which may be the cheapest way to bring them back to life down the road, which would be so ironic. But but as far as the push goes, though, I don't think it's going to last. I know I showed you last time you were out at my dad's place. He's been running on compressed natural gas for, gosh, probably since I was a junior in high school. So that'd be 07. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's the beat all end all for anything available right now. I mean, it's internal combustion. It's got an octane rating of 130. So you can run blowers, you can run super high compression. Use just like an EV, you can plug it in at your house and fill it up overnight. It's like a gallon per hour. I drove on it for 2 years straight. I had a dedicated car that didn't burn any gasoline ever. 12,000 miles between oil changes, and it still looks like honey when you change it because there's no carbon, and it's cleaner than a Prius.
I mean, so why do you think that hasn't caught on? I don't know.
That's a mystery
of it, or the actually like filling the vehicle.
Well, in the last decade, I've seen a ton of semis and like Frito-Lay and garbage truck companies have gone to CNG for their diesels because you can run it in diesel and gas motors. It's another perk of it. And the craziest part that makes me scratch my head is that the big three and Honda have been making these from the factory since the mid 90s. So they've been in production, and most of them go to be government vehicles. All the ones my dad bought were retired squad cars, Crown Vics, and a couple. He bought a truck that was from the military. So I don't understand it. I don't know if it's because they can't put a road tax on it, but that's the same as an EV if you're filling up your house. Right. But or maybe just it's not as profitable as oil for the petroleum companies. There's some sort of reason why it's not in the conversation, because I've lived it. I've watched it. It works in every temperature. Unlike, that's another thing about EVs is no one talks about the mileage they get in Canada or the range versus, Los Angeles. But these things will cold start. I mean, they work in all temperatures. And you can throw crazy power at it. So and it's incredibly safe. I mean, there's like videos of them, the tanks being shot with like guns and stuff. And it takes an incredible amount of force for them to rupture and explode, because it is 3,600 PSI in the trunk, which might scare people, but the tanks are incredibly resilient as far as impact, and like no real life collision would ever puncture a tank in one of those cars.
Yeah. I've always seen like the filling station. There's one south of the town I live in here, and like you can get CNG there. And I always kind of wonder, like, why don't I see more of those? But I've seen Crown Vics and stuff, like old, like you say, old state cars, but never any more on that. I think another interesting technology is hydrogen fuel cells, which there's a lot of things they have to figure out with that too. Like, I think BMW made a 7 Series that had it, right? And like the problem with that car is you couldn't actually park it in the garage because it was always venting a little bit. And if it was sitting in your garage, it would vent and fill your garage with this gas, right? So like that's the downside, and obviously never sold because everybody who bought a BMW 7 Series wanted to have their BMW 7 Series in the garage, right? But I think there's a lot of interesting things we haven't even touched on, right? On different ways we can make vehicles more efficient. Now they're doing synthetic fuels. That's another big thing. Like Porsche just invested a ton, and I think it was South America. They have a synthetic fuel station where they're making a fuel that would just work in any car.
Wow.
So right now on the road, you could purchase. So right now it's very expensive because they're just kind of testing it out. But I mean, that's a whole nother thing that could change all of this, right?
Yeah.
Way cleaner, way more efficient.
That's one of those things. It's like, you want to make sure though. It's like, is it gonna be like worse? Is it gonna cause cancer breathing in the fumes?
Well, yeah, that's the
more
whole
than
thing.
CO2.
There's
But you
some
know,
more research there for sure.
right? Yeah, but I mean, I'm all for any technology. I'm not even against EVs, but let the market decide. Bring the best
Right.
product to the people and let them vote with their dollars. I mean, I don't understand these pushes, and that's what all this hype is about. Is it's billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money being allocated to these manufacturers to do these pushes and all this green agenda. It's just a bunch of politicians pandering to their uneducated constituents that look what I did. I passed the Clean Green Save the Puppies Act. And it sounds all nice on paper, but you didn't do anything to make the air cleaner. You just embezzled a bunch of money from the taxpayer and made a bunch of unaffordable cars that are terrible for the environment. So
if I ask you this question, what would it take? Like, what would they have to be for you to buy one for your commuter for work, right? Like, what would they have to do? And what would they have to cost? You could buy a used one, right?
it would have to be by force. I mean, it'd just
Yeah.
be like my back's against the wall and I can't buy anything else.
Right.
I need to provide for my family. And
Right.
I hate every mile of it. So I just don't, I don't like being on my phone too much. I don't like being tracked and listened to and having all these things like, we'll send something in a text and all of a sudden I'm getting an ad on Instagram about it. And it's like, oh, it's creepy. Like,
Yeah.
I like my privacy. So in my car, I kind of like having no cameras, no sensors, no nothing. I don't like a seatbelt dinger yelling at me, let alone all these modern.
So somebody took a 3rd gen Camaro, made it electric, had 500 miles of range, and they sold you for $5,000. You'd be like, hell no.
Well, okay, so you're saying it's been swapped,
Yeah,
which means it's just the electric motor and no other.
Yep.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's preferable. I mean, but it still missed the sound and the smell. And,
oh, for sure. I was watching a review where they're track testing some electric cars too, and they're just like, oh, it's actually way easier to drive, and like, there's some validity to that, I'm sure. Like, you don't have to shift. You don't have the motor noise. You're just like listening to the tires, right? So all you have to do is focus on like not over driving the car and like braking zones. And they're just like, oh, it's way easier to be quick on. I'm like, well, you're kind of like taking away a lot. Like, yeah, T-ball is a lot easier than baseball too, right? Like,
right.
So if you're taking away the shifting and like the noises and all that, like, is it even the same thing anymore? Right.
Yeah. At that point, just go ride a roller coster and be on rails and just
exactly.
Right. Like G-forces. That's fun. I mean, yeah, that's cool. I don't actually mean any disrespect to someone if that was their passion doing that, but they can just be in their own class. Like, okay, today's electric day at the track.
Yeah. And I'm sure they'll have that, right? There's so many spec classes. There'll be a spec Model 3 soon. Right.
Yeah. But, there's just something about, a lot of the gearheads, like even like I've seen David Freiberger of Roadkill's been wearing the Gasoline Forever shirt a lot on his show lately. And he's in California, so I think he's being hit a little harder and faster than we are. Yeah. But it's as far as the hot rodders go, and maybe we're a dying breed, but there's just something about that, like I said, that excitement and that violence and the smells and just knowing what every single gear inside the motor is doing and troubleshooting your problems and testing and tuning and all that kind of stuff. There's something inherently cool about it. Like, kids hear a race car start and they know it's cooler than the Suburban. They don't know why. But when I had a WS6 that was canned with 500 horse and 3-inch straight pipes a few months ago. And my little toddlers, even my little daughter, they wanted to go everywhere. And I thought it was the coolest thing. It just sounds so exciting. There's something about it that the human beings are drawn to, whatever it is. I mean, it's just something electric cars can't offer. They're faster. I'll concede that. Not that it's not, you can't even argue it, but it's just not, it doesn't do much for car guys to, as far as the gearheads that are into drag racing and drifting and kind of all the people I've been around since I've been in the hobby. But like I said, maybe we're a dying breed. This next generation there might not even be into driving. If you're growing up in the city and the suburbs and all that, like cars are just a tool. It's just like a phone. They don't really care. Just when can I get the next one? What's the newest one? What can this one do? Um, but I think there's always going to be a certain demographic of people like us.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I'm probably a little bit. I'm like in the middle a little bit, right? Like I enjoy technology, but I love this weird like blend of it, right? Like I want the car to feel like old school and have like a soul to it, right? But like I also love that somebody took all this tech to make the motor make as much power as it could, right? I love modifying cars and all that too, but it's cool to me. Like I love the electric like suspension, the ELSDs. I think some of that technologies are so useful out on the track. But I like the motor. I want to hear that, right? I want to be able to go out my garage and change my own oil, right? I don't want to need to have a computer to change my battery out my car like some of them are now, right? So that's the tough thing. But finding a manual car that has modern tech in it is, I mean, impossible. They make more EVs every year than manual cars anymore, which is strange, right?
Oh, that's very depressing stat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what I always search out, is to find a manual car still, but like, yeah, they just don't exist, right? Like who makes one anymore? Like Ford Mustangs, right? Chevy's got
even the Corvette's automatic, right? Now the Vets.
Yep. Yeah, the C8. I just had one last week, and yeah, automatic. But their last Chevy was the Camaro. Now it's the Cadillac is their last manual, right? The Black Wings.
A little irony, a little ironic fun fact: the first automatic transmission that GM ever offered in a car was Cadillac. Now it's hilarious. The last manual.
Yeah, so that is funny. But yeah, like so many of those they're going away, right? So
that's depressing.
Yeah.
How was that C8?
It was good. I was actually going to send you a video of me launching it, but it's a good car, and I get the people who buy it. But the visibility out of it is like awful. So if you're going to get one, you have to get like the mid trim level that actually has. And I know, this is me liking tech, but my Camaro had a rear mirror that had a camera on the roof, so you can actually see this wide angle behind you. This didn't have that, and you try to like look over your right shoulder to see your blind spot, nothing, just the inside of the car, right? So, and then the seat is about 10 inches off the ground, so you got to get used to that life. But I would say, to me, the Camaro is a better car in every way, other than ride quality. The Corvette rode better.
Wow.
So, but that's my own opinion. If you were going to like go get a Z06, probably different story, right?
Yeah, that'd be definitely a fun car to at least test drive for a day. But yeah, for sure. I've never had any Vets newer than a C5, so I'm a little behind the times on that. And those are plenty enough for me. It's a great gas mileage.
The C5 is the sweet spot, I think. I mean, we'll probably get into this in another episode, but I would love to talk about building one of those. I think that would be like, I'm actually debating on picking one up. I think that'd be a fun project car.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of deals lately. They're coming after all the COVID craze. The prices are coming down a little bit.
Everything's wild right now. Like you can get,
get some deals. So I'm a little car heavy right now, but I'm just gonna hold on and not sell. I think a lot of that's got to do with not so much on the cheaper cars like that, but your cars that are like 40 to 100 grand. A lot of that's the interest rate. People want to pull out 11, 12% interest loans.
Best you get. Like that's
that'd be really good. I mean, I went to go refinance a car recently, which I have like a 2.9% on, and it was hard to find under 10. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, there's no point in refinancing. But that's a good segue. We wanted to kind of close on what's kind of bottomed out in the market. Might be a weekly segment of the show then. What car you think is bottomed out in the market that's a good buy right now?
Yeah, so I was saying, one, I love thinking about this kind of stuff, right? Like because you're again better at this than me. You've bought a lot of cars and flipped them and things like that, but there's ones that none of us saw coming, right? Like back in the 90s, nobody cared about Supras, right? Like they were cool, but like not $100,000 cars like they are now, right? So like, how do you predict some of that? So I I thought we could probably do this at each episode, and none of these are probably going to be. I would say one I have today that I thought of. It's probably not going to make a lot of money ever, but I think that it's probably at its bottom, and it's probably always going to kind of stay there and hold a place in someone's heart that they want one of these, right? And it's totally random, but I thought I'd go with this one. Is the Toyota FJ Cruiser. You remember those things?
Yeah. Okay.
They're kind of
What's your
quirky. They
motive
have
for
the
that?
suicide doors. They have 3 windshield wiper blades, right? Because the window's so like short and wide.
Yeah.
But body on frame, off-roader, right? Manual transmission available. You're going to keep on hearing me say that over and over again. But pretty basic 4-liter V6, right? Easy to work on, Toyota reliability. And off-roaders are hot, right? Like people are buying those Broncos and, all Wranglers and everything right now. And I know the old ones kind of came back, obviously, but I think these are going to be as cheap as they are. They're like, you can get them for like 10 grand right now and clean. And I could just imagine that being a cult following one day, right? Like there's not a ton of them out there. I think they made like 200, 300,000 in the US, right? And where else are you going to get that experience anymore? Everything's a computer on wheels, right?
Right.
So
yeah, that's then you have precedence for it already because a lot of those mid early 90s forerunners are kind of doing crazy money. My cousin's been playing with those, and you get a rust free one, and they can have like 190,000 miles on it, but it's a Toyota, so if it's rust free, I mean, they're going like north of 10. yeah, that's their thing. They're going like north of 10 grand. I mean, just for 190,000 mile car that for me, like wouldn't have turned my head until he started getting involved with them. I mean, to me, I'll appreciate anything that's clean. So if I see anything from the 90s that's that well kept, like it's going to turn my head, but not something I'm like, looking to buy in the future. But the more he kind of played with them, I was like, yeah, I mean, they got like 10 horsepower. They go nowhere, but I see like why people are attracted to them. They got all these different things you can do with them. Those, and he got into the Ram Chargers a lot, the late 80s.
Yep.
Dad Ram Chargers. He got him right in time. He's always into those things. And I mean, he bought one as little as like $3,800 that was rust free from Colorado. And I think that one's probably worth like, well, during COVID, I think it was probably close to 20 grand the way it sat. And then he didn't sell it, but it's still probably 13 grand.
Right.
The way it sits. So pretty solid investment. But as far as my prediction, I guess if we're going to pick one car, I might as well start with put my money where my mouth is the 96 and 7 Dodge Vipers, the blue and whites.
This is just for you to try to help get their value up higher.
yes. This episode 1 of our podcast with our giant audience. I'm going to sway the market. No, it's something I firmly believe. I mean, you're a little older than me, so you probably remember it better. But in the 90s, I mean, that was just the car. I mean,
dude, I had the poster on my wall.
Everyone did. Every boy.
Stripe,
if you didn't have the poster, you had the model. If you had the model, you had the Gran Turismo game or Need for Speed.
Right.
But I mean, every kid I went to their house, it was always like you see the blue and white Viper, and you forget how out of place that car was in '96. I mean, when you go back and look at a C4 Corvette with 260 horse, 275 horse, whatever, and then this V10 with 450 horse that it still holds up as far as styling. I mean, it still looks very high end and exotic. And then the thing that I didn't realize till I got into them, I'm on my third one now. I bought a high mileage 96 about 8 years ago. Sold that, regretted it. Got it for nothing. I don't want to tell you how little I paid for that one, but it was 96,000 mile clean title. And then a couple years ago, or about 4 years ago, I bought a 97 with 14,000 miles clean title. Had to buy my current house, so I sold that before COVID. And I don't want to tell you what I sold it for because it was so little. But let's just say after COVID, like 20 months later after I sold it, the car was worth 2.5 times what I sold it for, which was a real shot in the gut. So I told myself, if I ever see a clean title one that falls into my reach ever again that I can pull off, I'm going to buy it. So I just bought another one last year, 97 with 80,000 miles, but clean title, and it's set up real nice. And my plan is to hold that because I really think that those cars, once the 90s kids have money, I think those cars are going to be the one they're going to have that nostalgia for. Just like, I talked to my dad because he had a 69 Dodge Daytona in the mid 90s, and I think they bought it for 20, restored it, painted it, and sold it for 37 grand in like 95. And then they watched that car sell at Mecum in our town of Belvedere, Illinois, in '06 for like 280 grand with their paint on it still. So we were kind of comparing stories. Like, I think now, granted, there's a lot more competition. Like, I mean, as far as like the muscle car pool of the 60s and 70s, now you got crazy fast Mustangs, Camaros. I mean, there's so many different options, and it's gonna be a pretty competitive market for people to buy nostalgia back. But there's something about that car, and the crazy part about it is they only made just over 2,000 of the blue and whites. It really
Really?
they only made like only 2,000 Vipers a year. There's not that many Gen 2 Vipers, period. But the blue and whites, they made 1,000 or 1175 or so in '96, and my '97 is one of 975. So it's like 2,200.
Mm-hmm.
And then go try to find a clean title. They are so many salvage titles on those cars because that front hood was $20,000 from Dodge if you got into a fender bender. So anytime a doctor or a lawyer bought one of these things new and they no ABS, no traction control, it's a full on race car, and it got squirrely and you just went into a ditch and crunched your front end a little bit, 20 grand for the hood, your wheels, all that stuff, the paint, and the car was only like what 60 grand or so at the time. So real quick, it was you're up to its total by the time you repair it. So I would guess 40 to 50% have salvage titles. So you're talking about just over 1,000 cars out there with the blue and white and clean title right now.
That's
So when you do the supply and demand of all the 90s kids that I feel like we're not alone really wanted that car, someday they're going to retire or get to a real nice spot in their career and go, you know what, I'm finally going to buy that car I always wanted that was on my wall. And they're going to go, holy shit, there's not a lot of them available. So I'm anticipating I want to be early on that one and hold one. So I've got one in my garage right now, and I want to hold that until I'm vindicated. If not, I'll die with it.
Yeah, that's. I hope we keep doing this because I like thinking about that kind of stuff, right? Like what's the next? You know, who are the people who are getting into like the peak of their career, and then like what would they have wanted, right? I think there's a lot of ways to think about this too. Like the FJ is obviously just like it's never going to do anything like the Viper by any means, but like I think there's cars out there that just like will never lose money, right? You could just pick up,
right. And I mean, returns. So if the car is worth 150% more than you paid, and it doesn't eat when it's sitting in your garage. So as long as you can afford to pay the antique insurance on something, which is like next to nothing if you have a clean record, it's. I mean, I think even my Viper's like $30 a month because I hardly drive it. So that's the real only expense to it. As high as the miles are, we still take it on date nights and whatnot, but I don't want to have it 100,000 miles when I go to sell it, but 80 to 90 is probably not going to change the price very much.
Right.
So I would probably put 10,000 miles on it while I own it. But yeah, this will be a fun segment because I have a lot more cars that are a lot more affordable and attainable. I mean, I have a certain generation in mind that I've been playing with recently that I think is as cheap as they're ever going to be. I mean, I wish I could just keep them all, but I don't have the time, money, or space to make that real. But if I was placing my chips right now, there's a lot of cars I think are stupid cheap right now.
I remember Fox bodies. Like when I was getting out of high school, those are about, I graduated in 2003, right? So they're a little over 20 years old. You could pick one of those up, 3-4 grand, clean, like real clean, good cars. I should have just bought a storage, like a shop, and just filled it with Fox bodies, right? Like you can't find those at all anymore for less than 20. You can buy a 4-cylinder one for 20. Somebody's gonna put a coyote in it, right? Like
or one that's just been beaten down and hot rodded and rusty. Those are the only ones that are like under 10 grand I've been seeing. But yeah, they're for a clean one. I mean, I saw this was once again, I keep citing the COVID era, but that's where all the car prices were going nuts. I bring a trailer. There was a Saline Fox body convertible, 240 grand.
Oh my God.
I know. I was like, for a Fox, I don't care what it is. Like, I don't care if it's by Elvis. Like,
Exactly.
But it was interesting to see, like, okay, maybe but that kind of vindicates the point of nostalgia that people at that age that remember the 80s when those things were coming on, when Mustangs finally got somewhat fast again.
The Vanilla Ice videos, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got a coworker who's in his 50s, and he bought a Calypso Coral notchback Fox body when he's fresh out of the Gulf War. He came on with his GI Bill and bought one and sold it, and he's then ask me. He's like, keep an eye out. Find anything that's Calypso green, or Calypso green it's called. So anyone out there has a clean Calypso green Fox body, preferably notchback.
Is it the like lighter green that they had, or I don't remember what?
Yeah, it's like a turquoise green.
Yeah,
it's a real pretty color.
Man, you should have said something to me a while ago, because there was a guy that I know in town here that had one.
Oh no!
He won it in a raffle, and then he sold it not long after for like not much.
Oh, jeez. Wow. Yeah. I probably didn't know he was in the market at the time, but
yeah.
What are you going to do? There's no one out there.
Yep.
So, well, anything else you want to close on, Steve?
No, it was good. No, I think I'm going to think about more ideas for cars that I'm not going to lose to this time. I think that Viper one really blew me out of the water, but I'll think of something better.
Well, obviously I put a lot of thought into that one. The fact that I've gambled on 3 now, but I still haven't been vindicated because I always sell at the wrong time.
That's half the battle.
Yeah, I know. I was just, you gotta make decisions when you have little kids. But this one, I'm gonna try to hold on to. But yeah, there's plenty more though. I mean, there's a lot of cars that are in that $5,000 to $8,000 range right now that I think are poised to go north of 20 in the next decade.
For sure.
So yeah, we'll make this a regular segment to close the show out. This is pretty fun, and I think there's kind of endless predictions on that. So, and we can always look back and be like, hey, let's go back, remember, play a clip from episode 1 back in 2023 when I said this. I was right. So, awesome, Steve. Well, thanks for your time.
Yep. All right, man.